This is chapter 7 and 8, the social structure theories and social process theories. Hopefully it's going to be as brief as possible. I'll have this in one recording, and then I'll have the chapter 14 for violent crime in another recording. We are moving away from individual theories of the positivist school that looked at the individual differences of offenders or micro theories and towards more macro level theories, or what are called social structure theories. Social structure theorists, or sociologists, is what they're called many times, envision crime, delinquency, and deviant behavior as the product of social forces rather than of individual differences. They are similar in some of their beliefs, like positivism, that these forces are pushing the individual out of, and these forces are out of their control. Some of the most discussed and known social structure theories are called the strain theories, or as some theorists see it or call them as frustration that an individual feels. This impacts the lower class crime because of blocked opportunities. This is about the relationship between class and crime. Here we go. Emil Durkheim and Robert Merton are two of the founders of strain theories, along with Robert Agnew, who we'll talk about later. Durkheim saw crime as a result of the anonymity theory. He believed that crime was inevitable in every society, and as a result of rapid social change from industry and urbanization, the clash. He believed that all societies have people who will violate the social norms no matter what you do, and that crime actually has a place in every society. Merton drew from Durkheim's theories, but he saw crime as a result of strain that individuals face and how they respond to that strain, in which those goals are achieved. One of Durkheim's research interests was analyzing suicide rates. He noticed that suicides not only go up during periods of economic depression, but also during periods of sharp economic growth. While to most this may seem paradoxical, Durkheim pointed out that under the latter circumstances, a confusion about social norms frequently prevails. Though some have interpreted anonymity to mean normlessness, which we'll talk about in a minute, it is probably more accurate to describe it as a condition in which traditional norms no longer seem applicable, but new norms have not fully evolved. Again, anonymity as a condition in society which traditional norms no longer seem applicable. They no longer apply to the society, but new norms have not been fully developed. It was Durkheim's research on suicide that laid the foundation for anonymity or strain theory. His examples referred to higher suicide rates during wars and revolutions, as well as during periods of economic recession, depression, or advancement, as I just stated. He had 4 types of suicide in his typology. The egoistic suicide, resulting from a weakening of commitment to group values and goals. Altruistic suicide, precipitated by an overcommitment to the group values and norms. Fatalistic suicide, derived from excessive regulation. And anomic suicide, that occurs when rapid or extreme change or crisis threaten the group norms of life. This in turn leads to them becoming dissatisfied, frustrated, conflicted, and deviant. In 1938, Merton, he borrowed the concept of anonymity to explain deviance in the United States. His concept, however, differed from Durkheim anonymity. Instead, he felt that the critical ingredient was the ability of the social system to exercise control in the form of social norms. He talked of society's goals and the acceptable means for achieving those goals. He redefined anonymity as a disjuncture or a split between the goals and the means as a result of the way society is structured. It's not enough to simply be motivated to deviate. The potential deviant must be in an environment conducive to learning deviance, and once trained, they must have an opportunity to engage in deviation. Just as anonymity theory argues that legitimate means are not equally available to everyone in the social structure, they are saying that the illegitimate means are not equally accessible either. Now, these guys, they concentrated on the differential opportunity structures of one deprived group, which is the lower class male youths in large urban centers. There are, according to them, different types of lower class neighborhoods, each of which gives rise to a different type of delinquent subculture. For instance, they said in relatively stable neighborhoods where community members know one another, youths are more socialized into a criminal subculture. That means that the values material gain through illegitimate means. In this type of neighborhood, it's the adult criminal role model that are plentiful, and the young men really become their apprentices. They also said that through these contacts, the lower class boys learn the techniques on how to commit crimes and are really integrated into that criminal network. And it includes fences, corrupt police and politicians, and shady lawyers. In contrast to this, in less stable neighborhoods, they identified a conflict subculture that is more likely to develop in those less stable neighborhoods. They characterize these neighborhoods by social disorganization, and we're going to hear a lot of that. Most residents in these type of neighborhoods live in large housing projects that generate a kind of isolation and anonymous. And the third one, there are individuals in lower class communities who are unsuccessful in anything they try, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate opportunities. They're considered double failures, and they form the retreatist subculture. They basically just withdraw from the lifestyle of their community, and then they therefore turn to any way they can to make life, whether it's taking drugs, drinking alcohol, or any other way to get by in the day. A new version of strain theory that we were just talking about a minute ago with Merton and Durkheim has been recently developed by another criminologist, Robert Agnew, in 1992, and he maintains that the earlier versions, especially those of Merton, Cohen, Cloward, and Olin, really failed to receive much empirical support because they were so limited in their conception of what really constitutes strain. He expands the definition of strain and the types of adaptations individuals may utilize in response to it. In addition, he attempts to specify more precisely that the earlier theories, more precisely than the other theories, that the relationship between strain and delinquency, and he suggests a number of factors that are likely to influence an individual's choice of delinquent or versus non-delinquent. In expanding the concept, he points out there are many types of strain besides the traditional criminological formulation of a disjunction between aspirations and actual achievements. Agnew, he theorized that whether an individual responds to the strain in his or her life with deviant or criminal behavior depends on a number of constraints that are both internal and external that he calls conditioning factors. In a short version, when individuals cannot adapt, that is when they experience the strain and stress, and that results in the criminal behavior. Agnew distinguished between objective strains, which are events or conditions that are disliked by most members of a given group, and subjective strains, which are events or conditions that are disliked by the people who are experiencing them or who have experienced them. Steve Messner and Richard Rosenfeld, they supported a macro-level perspective of criminal theory similar to Robert Merton, but they used the American dream to express how stress leads to deviant behavior. For them, the American dream causes crime because it causes stress on individuals' need to succeed in order to reach the American dream that considers becoming wealthy, financially wealthy, and successful. This in turn causes the anomy. Their theory focuses on four aspects: the achievement, individualism, materialism, and universalism. As we talk about this criminal paradigm around strain theories, we need to be aware of the assumption that delinquency and criminal behavior are essentially problems found in the lowest socioeconomic level of our social structure. This is according to the social process theories. This is what strain theorists are basing a lot of their results on, is the lower class. The advent of self-report measures, however, have brought problems to this question. Strain theorists have been attacked since Merton and Durkheim, and this continues today. Some criminologists think the results depend on studies, and some think that strain theory is a myth because it focuses primarily on the lower class. It has been widely tested, but the disagreement still wages on about strain theory. That's why if you decide to choose strain theory, and a lot of students do because they think it's easier to explain, well, you don't have the stress, therefore you have the stress and therefore you have the strain and therefore you commit a crime. It's much deeper than that. And that's why if you decide to use strain theory in your discussion of your paper, you have to include anomy, and you have to really include the root of that anomy and the class conflicts. One excellent topic to discuss when we talk about theory is the policy implications. It's usually not addressed as much, but there are a number of implications towards policy on any of these theories. As we talked about, if policymakers don't listen to the results or listen to a theory that may not be supported, then policy can be changed or changed dramatically. Social ecology focuses on the person's relation to the social environment. For criminology, this really entails the study of the spatial distribution of crime and delinquency. Social ecology grew from the Chicago School of Thought, which originated with the Department of Sociology at the University of Chicago, as well as Robert Park, a sociologist. These theorists from the school, they studied people in their natural environment, and they found that a disorganized community lacks the stability and resources to formulate or accomplish collective goals, which in turn leads to higher rates of crime. Park, he researched the inner workings of Chicago with the help of many of the students. The focus of sociological attention came to rest on the problems that rested with the lives of the city dwellers. A major concern was social deviance, which was broadly defined as a violation of society's norms or rules for appropriate behavior. The term social deviance came to be used synonymously with the term social problems. So social deviance, social problems were considered the same. The goal for these sociologists was to study and explain deviance or social problems so they could devise a practical means to eliminate them. The Chicago sociologists emphasized the external sources of social problems. What is causing these social problems within the inner city, such as the social disorganization of city life. This is where we're coming up with social disorganizational theory. So their solutions rested not in treating the individuals, but rather in changing the society, social change. So that's why it's a macro theory as opposed to a micro theory in positivism. Park was one of the founding Chicago sociologists, and he applied the principles of plant and animal ecology in the task of understanding social deviance. Consequently, the Chicago School is also known as the Ecological School or the School of Human Ecology. He, along with other colleagues, Ernest Burgess and Lewis Worth, they identified several distinct zones that expanded into a pattern of concentric circles from the center of the city, which is called the concentric zone model. And you can take a minute to look at the model. It's also available in your book. And it's important that the reason they separated these into these zones is to be able to compare them. And you'll see a lot of this in additional theories. After they identified these zones and did research, they observed that they were not all equally plagued by crime, alcoholism, rates of mental illness, or any other problems. Instead, the further that you moved away from the city center, or number one here, the lower the rate of social problems. So according to the Chicago School, this is because of this social disorganization within the inner city areas. So social disorganization was identified and caused by rapid social change that disrupts the normal smooth operation of a social system. In these specific areas, the values and norms compete with each other. Sometimes they're illegitimate, sometimes they're not. It varies in cultures. Cultures conflict with each other. The members of younger generations, they'll clash with one another, as well as the members of the older groups. And so you see more social cohesion as you leave the inner city. The sociologists from the Chicago School were very successful. However, it was Shaw and McKay who undertook an analysis of crime, especially juvenile delinquency. They believed that the foundations for an adult criminal career were laid early in life. So the best way to control crime then was to prevent juvenile delinquency. They found that crime and delinquency were not consistently dominated by any particular ethnicity or racial group. They supported this because while the racial and ethnic composition of a certain neighborhood changed over the years, the rates of delinquency in those neighborhoods remained fairly constant. They reported that the neighborhoods with the worst delinquency problems also had the highest rates of other serious problems. They found that these neighborhoods were in transition. They were undergoing the process of invasion, dominance, and succession. On one hand, the neighborhoods were being invaded by newly arrived immigrants and migrant groups that resulted in a flight of most of the current residents to leave. These new groups did not have the resources to live in better areas of the city, and so they had to face the difficulty of adjusting to life in a different society. From this perspective, then, the solution to crime problem, according to this school of thought, lies not with the treatment of the individual offenders, but with programs to shore up traditional social controls in disorganized neighborhoods until those neighborhoods can become stable. Now we're going to move to the social process theories. Another way to look at these social process theories is learning how to be a criminal. It's because it focuses on the theories of crime that emphasize the role in social learning or socialization towards the development of criminal behavior. Typically, we don't approach crime and delinquency as primarily a lower class problem, and the key to explaining behavior is through learning from others. According to this theory, individuals learn values of either conformity or defiance through the social processes. We learn criminal and non-criminal behavior the same way through interaction with others. In other words, criminal behavior is a product of the same learning processes as non-criminal behavior. Criminologists that support the social processes theory emphasize the importance of socialization, and they study the agents within society, especially the family, the school, peer group, and more recently the media. They measure how this affects an individual's likelihood of pursuing criminal or non-criminal activities. And as I said, how to teach a criminal. They learn how to become a criminal through the interaction in their society. Therefore, they are being taught criminal behavior. Edward Sutherland lived from 1883 to 1950, and he is generally regarded as the leading criminologist of his generation. He is best known for his study of white-collar crime, his life history analysis of the professional thief, and his development of what we're going to talk about now, the theory of differential association. He was critical of biological and psychiatric theories of crime, but he was dissatisfied also with the disorganized nature of the other sociologists' explanations of the same time, which took a multi-factor approach to crime causation. He developed his own perspectives and drew on the work of other scholars. Clearly, however, he was most strongly and directly influenced by the writings of his friends and colleagues at the University of Chicago, who recognized the differential association theory and the idea of cultural transmission. He was also influenced by symbolic interactionist Herbert Mead and Thomas. This should actually be a pretty easy theory for you guys to understand. You should have little difficulty because he presented it in the form of 9 fairly straightforward propositions that each followed a brief explanation. So you can read these 9 associations on the next, I think, 2 or 3 slides. Sutherland, he makes it clear that criminality is not inherited. It is learned in the same way that any other behavior is learned, through interpersonal communication and social interaction within intimate groups. He also found that all associations are not equal. He specified that associations can vary in frequency, duration, priority, and intensity. In other words, associations that occur more frequently and more often are longer lasting. Those will have a greater impact on an individual than just a brief chance encounter. Remember that the theory of differential association, you're going to see this on your quiz, is an explanation of how individuals become criminal or delinquent. Now here are your principles. These are in your book. Simply stated, birds of a feather will flock together. That suggests that associations with deviant peers will lead to criminal behavior because individuals learn definitions that are favorable to the violation of law from their peers. But they also, those that engage in criminal activities, they will continue to seek out peers with the same attitudes. Therefore, it just continues on the cycle. So take a minute and think about that. We're going to talk about this in class. Which explanation of these do you agree with? From Sutherland, more theories developed, such as Ronald Acker's social learning theory. It's a revision of Sutherland's work that utilizes the central concepts and principles of modern behavioralism. He maintained that criminal behavior is learned. However, the way it is learned, which is different, is through direct operant conditioning and an imitation or modeling of others. Operant conditioning is probably more familiar to you guys because most of us have heard about Pavlov's dogs who were trained or conditioned to salivate when they heard a bell ring. This is operant conditioning, and it's also called classical conditioning, where the behavioral response is elicited by a prior stimulus. According to Akers, though, the behavior takes and its frequency of recurrence depend on instrumental conditioning, which means simply behaviors learned or conditioned as a result of the effects, outcomes, or consequences it has on someone's environment. I know, Dr. Black, why don't you just say that in the first place? This diagram should help you see how differential association moves from one stage to the other. The notion of culture conflict is a theme in differential association theory. Sociologist Selin, he argued in the late 1930s that crime is an outcome of a clash between cultures. According to him, in a homogeneous society, the conduct norms that are codified into law represents a consensus of the society's members. But in a heterogeneous society that contains many diverse subcultures, the law represents the conduct norms of the dominant culture only. Subcultural theories stem from Merton's theory. His argument that criminal behavior is an outgrowth of the strains that people experience because of their particular positions in the social structure. A number of theorists have applied this idea to study one specific form of criminal behavior, gang delinquency, but others have extended it to adult crime as well. Right now, we're going to look at the subculture of violence from Wolfgang and Ferracuti. In the study of adult crime, they utilize the concept of subculture. Theirs is an analysis of homicides, particularly passion crimes that are not premeditated and not caused by psychosis or other serious mental disorder. They argue that makeup of majority of homicide cases and occur predominantly among certain social groups and in certain neighborhoods. According to them, the direct expression of aggression typically is unacceptable in middle-class households and communities. Middle-class parents, for example, usually do not hit their children to punish them, and a derogatory comment by a neighbor is usually ignored. In contrast, the lower class places less value on life. According to them, not me, physical punishment of children is routine and quickly resort to a physical combat as a measure of daring, courage, or defense, or to defend their honor. Now, as I told you in class, that our theories are changing, and criminologists are trying to come up with new ideas. Elijah Anderson is actually he has introduced a new approach to explain the disproportionate violence by African Americans in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. His code of the street differs from the subculture of violence, though, and other culture conflict theories in identifying the origins of the cultural content. He offers a connection to social structure theories, reasoning that the street code develops in response to poverty, discrimination, family disruption, and other structural problems. In just a couple sentences, according to him, individuals committed to the street code, they feel compelled to risk their life in violent confrontations if they've been dissed by somebody. And the code requires the resident to project toughness and engage in violent activity. Figure 8.2 in your book displays this in a very understandable way. And I'm going to ask in class about this theory and ask for details. So feel free to do a little extra work on this when I ask this, and you'll get extra points. There are other theorists that also studied the subculture of violence, and Miller is one of them. He studied delinquent gangs that form in the lower class community itself. He argued against what Cohen found when Cohen only examined lower class gang delinquency from the perspective of the middle class, and he characterized it as non-utilitarian. But Miller maintains that such behavior is stable and essentially ritualized. It serves to support and maintain the basic features of the lower class way of life. And how did he do this, you ask? He identified 6 focal concerns, and he said while not restricted to the lower class, they are given a distinct priority and weighting by members of this class relative to members of the middle class. Trouble, toughness, smartness, excitement, fate, and autonomy. We move now to the last theories in this group. I know you're just going, yay, I wish you keep going, Dr. Black. I really want to know what's going on. Anyway, now we move to what are called the control theories. And the first one we're going to talk about is the techniques of neutralization. The theories we've discussed so far have highlighted differences between criminals and non-criminals and delinquents and non-delinquents. But Matza and Sykes developed a different approach. They pointed out that if traditional positivist theorists of crime are correct, then some individuals would be criminal all the time, right? If they were born criminal, they would never stop being a criminal, where others would never deviate, because if they weren't born with that gene, or they weren't born and they didn't have those criminal characteristics, they would never become criminal. Instead of seeing delinquency as a rejection of these norms, they view it as an end product of the process they call neutralization. In order to understand this, we have to understand what the concept of drift is. And according to them, adolescent behavior runs along a continuum with total freedom at one end and total constraint at the other. So rather than put themselves at one end or the other, they facilitate between these two extremes, therefore called the drift. They drift into delinquency, and it's affected by learning justifications or rationalizations that can neutralize the constraint of the society's norms on behavior. They call these justifications or rationalizations techniques of neutralization. They are listed here on your slide. Something important to remember about control theorists: they assume that society is characterized by a single conventional moral order. Now, Travis Hershey, we're going to move to the social bond theory. Travis Hershey, he wrote The Causes of Delinquency in 1969, where he presented his own version of the control theory, and it actually used to be called Hershey's control theory, which is changed to the social bond theory. He believed that individuals with strong social bonds are unlikely to engage in delinquency, and he specified 4 elements: attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. The most important element of these is attachment. It refers to an individual's sensitivity to the feeling of others. He also referred to the second element, commitment, as the rational component. The underlying idea of commitment is that people develop a stake in playing by the rules. They invest their time, energy, money, emotions, and so on in pursuing a specific activity, such as getting an education, building a career. Involvement is an opportunity element of the bond. This premise underlies involvement. The involvement is straightforward. If a person is engrossed in conventional activities, such as studying for school, studying for their education, working on their career, playing a sport, that he or she will simply not have time to participate in deviant or criminal activities. The final element of the bond, belief, refers to the extent to which an individual truly believes he or she should obey the rules of society. As noted earlier, control theorists do not recognize variations in normative belief systems. Last thing, Hershey recognized that the 4 elements of the social bond are interrelated. Thus, an individual who is strongly attached to his or her parents and cares about their feelings will also likely be will also likely express a strong belief in the moral validity of social rules. Likewise, an individual who has a high stake in conformity, that is, commitment, they are likely to be actively involved in the conventional activities. Yet, each element of the bond is analytically distinct and should affect deviancy uniquely. He also found that the more committed a youth was, and the stronger his belief in conventional morality, the less likely he was to be delinquent. One of his most important findings, now this is going to be on your test, was that there was no relationship between social class and reported delinquency. There was only a slight variation in reported delinquency by race, despite the significant racial disparity. Again, he found no relationship between social class and reported delinquency. And Hershey got together with Michael Gottfredson, and they wrote The General Theory of Crime. And they actually wrote a book that's called The General Theory of Crime, which goes into great detail about this. Gottfredson and Hershey argue that crime is a product of a lack of socialization or learning. It's a lack of self-control. This is an opposite of the other process theories. They accept the classical assumption that crime is the natural consequence of unrestrained human tendencies to seek pleasure and avoid pain. They have a separate definition of crime. You need to understand this in order to understand this theory. Acts of force or fraud undertaken in pursuit of self-interest. That is their definition. All crimes share in a common characteristic in that they provide easy and immediate gratification of desires that are exciting, risky, thrilling, and they offer few, if any, long-term benefits. People who deviate from the norm lack self-control. They said people lacking self-control have a concrete here and now orientation and have difficulty deferring gratification. Low self-control is a result of ineffective or inadequate socialization. Within their theory, they identified elements of self-control: impulsiveness, simple task, risk-seeking, physicality, self-centeredness, and temper. I will let you read those on your own.